Morning, good Shabbos.
Hi, Jerry. Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, and everybody else who's invisible except for Alex's picture.
Yeah,
Good morning, good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, Bob and
Shabbos,
Anna.
everyone. Good Shabbos.
Shabbos Noah.
And Wheeler, the hund.
Yep. Wheeler, but we can't see him.
Wheeler, up. Come on.
he's getting ready for the Shabbat experience with the kids.
Up.
Oh, I heard him.
Come on. Up, 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 up. Oy.
There he is.
Got it.
Shabbos.
Here, I'm here. Good morning,
Shabbos.
everyone. Shabbat shalom.
Good
Shabbat
Shabbos.
Shalom.
You warm, Alex, in there?
Doing just fine.
Okay.
Yep. I remember looking into the sunlight in there.
Yeah.
There's
Good
shades
to have
though.
these little curtains.
That's good. Yeah, the Mandels put up curtains.
Very necessary.
It is.
You'll
Yeah,
be glad to know, Mike, that the sidewalk is nicely cleared.
Oh, that's good.
otherwise it would have been frozen overnight.
Well, yeah, but if it, well, other things too. But it melts off the Olive Street side from the roof, and it freezes when it comes off the roof because there's shade at the bottom. That's a
Yeah, although
Yeah,
it's the same contractor, but I think they used a snow blower this year, so they actually left some snow right up against the building. So I think when it drips, it'll just
that's
fall onto
good.
that
Yeah.
and not freeze the sidewalk. We'll see.
Yeah, if it absorbs it and was enough snow that if it went into there, it would stay there for a while.
We'll get a nice ice wall.
Yeah, we could have ice skating on the sidewalk.
Shabbos, Barry, Bonnie.
Hi, good Shabbos.
Hey, good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos,
Bonnie.
everybody.
Good Shabbos.
Hi, Leah. Hi, Barry.
Good Shabbos.
Bonnie, did you go walking this morning?
No.
No.
Go after service.
I didn't even think of going yesterday.
All right, Judy, impress us. You went out, right?
I did. I took a nice long walk yesterday. It was beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yesterday, but not this morning at 7
No,
o'clock.
I
7
did it this
degrees,
morning, but
though.
I will probably this afternoon, like you said, Bonnie.
So Judy, what did you?
Well, I met my friend, Angie, who's coming on. We walked at 7:15.
Impressive.
How cold was it?
It's about 17, 18 degrees, but not much
Sure.
wind. So
Sure.
Here it was 5.
Yeah. Oh, that's our good reason. Yeah. Only you're farther north, so it's probably a little chillier
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
But there was
wow.
no wind.
That's the best part. No wind here either.
Now, you've got a
Yeah.
son in Maine somewhere. Kennebunk?
Yeah, right. Kennebunk.
Okay, we've got friends in Kennebunk
That's right. That's right.
Up on porch.
and Kennebunkport. I have one in Kennebunk.
Oh.
Haha.
Okay.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
a
you
nice
know,
area.
the
Smart
first-
people.
The first 5 years in supermarkets, I was in the frozen food section. Well, you know,
That explains it.
it taught me freeze my brain. Yeah, but no, the tips of my fingers. So I tell the kids that they wear gloves nowadays, but I never wore gloves, and after a while it sort of burns, and you don't feel it. Yeah, I don't know if it's frostbite or whatever.
When you don't feel it, you're in trouble.
When, yeah, but who knew back in the 60s,
I remember
Oh, I
one
know.
day, they didn't have, it was a very cold day outside DC where I lived. I mean, it was really, really cold. It was around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And the school bus didn't come. So I walked to school, to high school. It was about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles. And when I got there, like a half an hour, my fingers and toes were just hurting. The pain was so intense. I couldn't, it went away, but I remember that experience.
And was it uphill both ways, Michael?
Was it uphill both ways? Oh, yeah, it was up and downhill both ways. There were a lot of hills, up and down. I took the shortcut, though. I could cut across a park, which was quicker than if you drove there.
Well, we lived in
Good Shabbos,
Minneapolis.
Karen.
Hello, good Shabbos, Jerry. It's good to see you. I've missed you. You doing okay?
I'm doing okay. I've been more often than not on Zoom with the family.
Yeah, that's what's been happening for me as well. Over
With
Hanukkah.
the holiday.
Zoom and FaceTime.
So like Thursday night, we're on a family with all 8 candles, and all 10 of us had menorahs. It was nice,
Yeah.
Turned off all the lights
Gotta go put some.
in all 4 places, and it's sort of, it was bright. It was beautiful. I had a good time anyway.
Good.
But anyway,
That's great.
We'll get back to normal as we're gonna get, I guess. Hopefully, we'll all have a better 2021.
Everyone's wishing. Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Hello, everybody.
Sharon.
Hello, Angie.
Hi, hello. Nice to see you all.
So, yeah, we got 12.
Yeah, we're gonna wait 1 or 2 more minutes. We were hoping for, or I am still hoping that Max Kirstein is gonna join us and do a little bit at the beginning of the service. But obviously the window for him to show up on time is a little bit tighter than it is for the rest of us. So I'm gonna give him 2 more minutes, and then we'll have to bump him to next week, I guess. But I do want to give him a little wiggle room here.
Hey,
There he is on the bottom. Click it.
Chris.
You gotta click down here first. Type message, click.
Angela, Kristen.
One
Good
finger.
morning.
Hi, good.
Kristen.
Hey, Kristen.
No, you gotta get rid of this.
Morning.
Okay, now type.
Good morning, Joel.
The dog is talking to us. What did
He wants
Dog's
us
eager to get going. The dog's a yak.
he say?
Killer.
Do I go back?
Move it, click.
I think we just muted Wheeler.
Yeah.
He was probably saying something terribly profound that we'll never know now.
Bob and Anna will know. They'll be able to share it with us.
Oh, they could tell us. Okay.
I'm sure if there's anyone who understands the deep thoughts coming out of that dog's mind, it's the
You
2
didn't
of
say
them.
anything.
Yep.
Did.
Oh, on my own. Okay.
All right. Well, I think we are going
Right
to
there.
get going, and I'm going to, of course, start with the reading. So I'll give Max another minute or two to pop in, and we'll see what happens. But I want to thank you all for being here and for being here bright and early and coming together for Shacharit this morning on Shabbat. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful day. And I wanted to start this morning, with I found myself with the first big snowfall of the year feeling completely unprepared and still dealing with some of the consequences. Both Mac and I around the farm and around the house of not quite remembering, what happens when a foot plus of snow falls on the ground and all the little things you need to take care of before you can't see them again until, March or April maybe. But there's always that really beautiful, couple moments in whatever point of the day, whether it is like waking up and seeing everything blanketed or, looking out the window in the middle of a snowy day. And just feeling that stillness whenever there's not a plow going by, and the beauty that comes with a heavy snow, especially the first one, and especially before you go outside for the first time and realize that you don't have a shovel on hand or you forgot to buy salt or anything. So especially in those moments of kind of beauty and quiet. So I wanted to turn this morning to Mary Oliver, because it felt like an appropriate kind of Mary Oliver time to me. And I want to start us off this morning with Snowy Night by Mary Oliver. Last night, an owl in the blue dark tossed an indeterminate number of carefully shaped sounds into the world, in which, a quarter of a mile away, I happened to be standing. I couldn't tell which one it was, the bard or the great horned ship of the air. It was that distant. But anyway, aren't there moments that are better than knowing something and sweeter? Snow was falling so much like stars, filling the dark trees, that one could easily imagine its reason for being was nothing more than prettiness. I suppose if this were someone else's story, they would have insisted on knowing whatever is knowable, would have hurried over the fields to name it. The owl, I mean. But it's mine, this poem of the night, and I just stood there listening and holding out my hands to the soft glitter falling through the air. I love this world, but not for its answers, and I wish good luck to the owl, whatever its name, and I wish great welcome to the snow, whatever its severe and comfortless and beautiful meaning. And as we transition into our services this morning, let's take that sense of beauty and that sense of kind of unanswerable questions and try to find a little bit more inspiration as we appreciate, the glare of the beautiful sun glinting off what's left of the beautiful white snow. And we will begin this morning with Ma Tovu, and I will put it up on the screen for us to follow together. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. And we'll continue with Birchot HaShachar, the series of blessings with which we begin our day. If you would like, please rise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan savivina lechlim ben yom uven laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam roka haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasali kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael betifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten li'ayif koach. Praised are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, removing sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids. And we will continue on with the Psalm for Shabbat, which, if you have a Siddur, is on page 72 at the bottom. Tzadik Katamar. Tzadik Katamar yifrach ke'erez balvanon yiskeh shetulim beveit Adonai bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu. Od yenuvun v'seva deshenim v'rananim yiyu lehagid ki ashar Adonai tzuri velo avlatavo. And we will continue with our first mourner's Kaddish of the morning. And I will give anyone who would like to join in on the Kaddish or respond to the Kaddish the opportunity to unmute and do so. Yitgadal, Yitgadash, Shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
Ve'alma, Divrach Yirtei, Ve'amlich Malchutei, Be'chayechon, Uve'omechon, U'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, U'zman Kariv, Imru, Amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Olamei Omaya.
Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitzhar, V'Yitalam, V'Yitasei, V'Yitadar, V'Yitalei, V'Yitalal, Shemei V'Kudesha,
Riku.
Le'ela, Mikol Birchata, V'Shirata, Tushvachata, V'Nechemata, V'Amiran, Be'alma, V'Imru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shmaharaba Min Shemaya, L'Chaim Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'Imru, Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'Roham, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, V'Imru, Amen.
Amen.
Everyone but me will go back on mute, and we will continue with Baruch Shamar. Baruch Shamar v'haya ha'olam baruch hu. Baruch oseh v'reshit. Baruch omer ve'oseh. Baruch gozer u'mekayem. Baruch merachem al haaretz. Baruch merachem al habriot. Baruch meshalem sachar tov lireyav. Baruch chaylad v'kayam lanetzach. Baruch podeh u'matzil. Baruch Shemo, Baruch Shemo. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, compassionate creator, extolled by your people, glorified by your faithful servants. We laud you with the psalms of your servant David. We extol you in song. We celebrate your fame in melody. We proclaim you sovereign, singular, eternal God. Praised are you, Adonai, sovereign, magnified with songs of praise. You may be seated, and we will continue with the Ashrei. Any volunteer out there who wants to be the responsive voice, or who wants to do part A and I'll be the responsive voice?
I'm always happy to do it.
All right, Sharon, please go ahead. Mike, we'll get you next week because I saw your
Oh, I'm
hand
sorry,
too.
but did Mike want to do it? Give me a page number.
Page
I got
96.
it. Never
How
mind.
about if I do it with Sharon?
I got it.
Great, love it. Mike and Sharon, you guys are on. I'm going to mute myself.
Oh, okay.
Even better.
Okay. Shall I start, Mike, and you respond?
Sure.
Ashrei yoshvei veitecha, oja hallelujah, selah.
Ashrei shakokolo, Ashrei shadonai Elohav.
Tehillah leDavid, Adonimcha Elohai hamelech, va'avarcha shimcha le'olam va'ed.
Bechol yom avorchecho, v'alo shimcho le'olam va'ed.
Gadol Adonai hulal me'od, v'ligdulato ein cheker.
Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, ugvurotecho yagidu.
Hadar kavod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha.
Vezuz norotecho yomeru, udorlecho asapreno.
Zecher avtucha yabiu, v'tzidkatcha yiranenu.
Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erek apayim, ugdal chesed.
Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav.
Yoducha Adonai kol v'chasidecho yivorchucha.
Kevod malchutcha yomeru, ugvuratcha yedaberu.
Lahodia libnei ha'adam gevuratav, ugvod hadar malkuto.
Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador.
So make Adonai lecho hanoflim, v'zokef lecho hakafufim.
Einei chol elecha yisaberu, v'yata noten lahem et achlam be'ito.
Poteach et yodecha, umasbia lecho chai rotzon.
Tzadik Adonai b'chol drachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav.
Karov Adonai lecho korav, lecho asher yikoruhu v'emet.
Yetzon yireav ya'aseh, ve'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai et kol ohavav, v'et kol hoshoim yashmid.
V'hilat Adonai yedaber pihi, v'yivarech kol basar shem kodsho li'olam va'ed.
Anachnu nevorek yam me'atov yad olam. Hallelujah.
Yasher koach to both of you. Thank you both so much. It's really nice to hear a couple other voices work in tandem, and to be able to be on mute myself and just appreciate listening to that. And I know that last year within the Hebrew school, Noah had a financial incentive for any kids who, felt confident enough to come up and learn the whole Ashrei. And if any adults want to work on learning the whole Ashrei so that they can step in as well. I don't know if I'm going to promise a financial incentive, but there's always challah or rugelach or other things that we can work out to light a fire under you. So thank you to the two of them. We will continue with Psalm 150, which is on page 100. Hallelujah, 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 kerov gudlo. Hallelujah, 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 beteka shofar. Hallelujah, hallelujah, benevel bechinor. Hallelujah, 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 betof umachol. Hallelujah, hallelujah, beminim ve'ugav. Hallelujah, 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 betil tzele shama. Hallelujah, hallelujah, betil tzele trua. Kol hanshama tehallelia, hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehallelia, hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehallelia, hallelujah. We continue on the top of page 102 with the beginning of Az Yashir. If you would like, please rise. Az Yashir Moshe uvenei Yisrael et hashira hazot Adonai vayomru leimor Ashir al Adonai ki goga sus verachlo rama vayam ozi vezimratya Vayihi li lishua ze'eli ve'anvehu Elohei aviv aromemenhu. We continue at the bottom, in the middle of page 103. Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. Kila Adonai Mulcha Moshe Bogoim, Falum Boshim Bartel Shpor Tarisav, Vaital Adonai Hamelucha, Vahaya Adonai Lamelech Al Kol Haaretz, Vayom Adonai Echad, Ushemo Echad. And we continue in the middle of page 105. If you'd like, you may be seated. El b'tatzumot uzecha, hagadol b'chvod shemecha, hagibor lanetzach, v'nor b'noratecha, hamelech hayoshev, al kisei ram v'nisa, shochen ad maron, v'kadosh shemo, v'chatuv ronik tzadikim b'Adonai, Lishrim navatila, befi sharim titala, udivrei tzadikim titbarach, uvilshon chasim titromam, uvekerev kedoshim titkadash, uvmachalot rivavot amcha beit Yisrael. B'yonai parshim chal makeinu b'chol dar vador. Shekein chovat koretzin l'fanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'lhei avotenu le'odot le'alel shabech l'faer. L'romeim l'hader l'vrech l'aleo kaleis al kol divrei shira v'tishbachot David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha. And on the top of 106 we rise. Yishabach shimcha la'ad malkeinu Ayla melech hagedol kadosh b'shamayim v'aretz Ki lachane Adonai Eloheinu ve'avotenu shir shvacha halav v'zimra ozmem shal netzach kula gvura tila tiferek dusha u'malchut brachot ve'odot me'ata v'ad olam baruch ata Adonai el melech gadol batishbachot el haodot Adon haniflot habocher b'shrei zimra melech elchei ha'olamim. We unmute for the Chatzi Kaddish and the Baruch Hu. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'amad yivrachirutei b'amlich malchutei b'chayechon ve'mechon chay l'chol Beit Yisrael b'agalav izman kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevorach v'yamam olomei omaya.
V'yishtabach v'kvar v'shema minaseh v'tadar v'tayfal shmei l'kudusha b'reichu.
Riku.
Elam mikol berchata v'shirata v'shchata v'nechmata damiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or v'orei choshech oseh shalom u'vorei et hakol. Praise to you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, creating light and fashioning darkness, ordaining the order of all creation. And we continue at the bottom of page 107 with Ein Kirkecha, which will take us into El Adon on 108. Ein Kirkecha Adonai Eloheinu b'olam hazeh, v'ein zolatacha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes biltacha golinu l'mot HaMashiach, v'ein domelecha moshienu l'tchiyat hametim. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch umvorach befi kol neshama gadlo v'tuvo Malei olam da'at utfuna sovevi moto Hamit gael chayot hakodesh v'nehedar bechavod al hamerkava zechut umishor lifnei chiso chesed v'rachamim lifnei kevodo tovim meorot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram beda'at Bevina uvaskel koach ugvura natan bahem liot moshlim bekerev tevel meleim ziv umfikim nogana ezivam bechol haolam semechim betzeitam vesasim bevoam osim b'eim haritzon konam Pe'er v'chavod notnim lishmot alav erina lezecher malchuto kara lashemesh vayizrach ora'a v'hitkin surat havana shevach notnim lo kol tzeva marom Tiferet u'gedulas rafim ve'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh. Nai, 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 nai. And we'll move ahead a couple pages to the bottom of page 110. And sing Or Chadash. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. V'nizke kulanu meheira leoro. V'nizke kulanu meheira leoro. Baruch atah Adonai yotzer hameorot. And on the top of page 111, let's read together in the English. Deep is your love for us, Adonai, our God, boundless your tender compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, you taught our ancestors life-giving laws. They trusted in you. For their sake, graciously teach us. Our Maker, merciful provider, show us mercy, grant us discernment and understanding. Then will we study your Torah, heed its words, teach its precepts, and follow its instruction, lovingly fulfilling all its teachings. Open our eyes to your Torah, help our hearts cleave to your mitzvot, unite all our thoughts to love and revere you. Then we will never be brought to shame, for we trust in your awesome holiness and will delight in your deliverance. Bring us safely from the four corners of the earth and lead us in dignity to our holy land, for you are the source of deliverance. You have called us from all peoples and tongues, constantly drawing us nearer to you, that we may lovingly offer you praise, proclaiming your oneness. Praised are you, Adonai, who loves the people Israel. Ve'kerev tal shimcha, hagdol sovemet, l'dol l'cha yochedcha be'ava, baruch atah Adonai, habocher b'amo Yisrael, v'ahava. And I invite anyone who would like to unmute to join me for the Shema and the V'ahavta. Shema
Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Baruchim Kavod Malchusod Adon Noen.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol levocha nafshecha v'yodecha v'yu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shivtam lefanecha b'shivtecha v'leitecha v'lechtecha b'derech v'shochacha v'kamecha v'shartam v'yota yodecha v'hoyilototofot v'neinecha v'tavtam al mezopetecha u'v'sharecha.
אם שמוע תשמעו מצוותיי אשר אנוכי מצווה אתכם היום לאהבה את אדוני אלוהיכם ולעבדו בכל לבבכם ובכל נפשכם ונתתי את ארצכם מתורה ומקוש ואספת דגנך ותירשך ויצרך ונתתי עשב בשדך לבהמתך ואכלת ושבעת הישמרו לכם פן יפתה לבבכם ושרתם ועבדתם אלוהים אחרים והשתחוויתם להם וחרף אדוני בכם ויצר את השמיים ולא יהיה מטר והאדמה לא תיתן לגאולה ועבדתם מהרה מעל הארץ הטובה אשר אדוני נותן לכם ושמתם את דבריי אלה על לבבכם ועל נפשכם וקשרתם אותם לאותה ידכם, והיו תותפות בין עיניכם, ולימדתם אותם את בניכם לדבר בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך וישעריך, למען ירבו ימיכם ימי בניכם על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם לתת להם. כי מהשמיים על הארץ, ויאמר אדוני משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית. וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. And we turn to the middle of page 114, where we'll continue in just a moment with Mi Chamocha. After that, we'll start the Amidah together, come unmuted for the Kedusha, and then take a couple minutes for silent prayer and reflection and meditation. Tehilot l'Elyon Baruch Barach Moshe Miriam Bnei Yisrael Lachanu Shira B'simcha Rabah V'amru Chulam Mi Chamocha V'elim Adonai Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilot osei felech shirach shashukulim l'shimcha svatayam yachad kulam hoduvim lichu ve'amaru Adonai imloch leolam va'ed Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Uftechinu Mecha, Yehuda v'Yisrael, Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzvot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agid tehillatcha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'avoteinu v'imoteinu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot U'Mevi Golei Bneihem Leman Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer Ufokeinu Moshiach U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayim Eitim Atarav Le'Oshia Mashiv HaRuach, Murid HaGashem, Mechakel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayim Eitim Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Verofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayim Emunato Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gevurot, Umido Melach, Melech Memit Umechaye Umatzmiach Yeshua B'ne'eman atah l'chayot meitim Baruch atah Adonai Mechaye Hametim.
Kadesh Shimo Olam Kishem Shema Kishimoto Bishmei Morom Kakotu Vayanivi Raze Elze V'Yomar
Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam Keshem shemakti shimoto b'ishmei marom Kakatu v'al yad v'karazel v'yamar
Kadosh, 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 Adonai, Oretz Kavodo, Oz Bekor Rash Gadol, Adiv Chazak Mashmim, Nasim Lumasarafim, Lumatam Baruch Yomeru.
Az bekol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim kol. Az bekol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim kol. Mitnasim leumat serafim, mitnasim leumat serafim, leumatam baruch yomeru.
Baruch Kavod Adonai, Imakamachom Alkeinu Tofi Avitim Lokolenu, Imagim Anaknu Lok, Matai Tim Lok Etzion, Bekorov Yomeinu Lilam Voed Tishkon, Tikadal Betikadash Betok Yerushalayim Yircha, Bedor Vodor Netzach Nitzvokim.
Kom Malkeinu Tofia v'timocha enukim mechakim anachnu lach. Matai timoch b'tzion bekarov yameinu le'olam v'tishkon. Tikadal v'tikadash b'tov Yerushalayim Yircha. Bedor vador netzach netzachim.
V'einenu tirena malkutecha.
David Mashiach Tzidkecha.
Yimlo
Hallelujah. Vedor vador nagid gadlecha unetzach tzachim kedushatcha nakdish v'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinoi mushlam ved ki amelech gadol v'kadosh ata baruch ata Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Yaseh shalom shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. 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 V'meru, amen. And we'll continue with the full Kaddish, which I will not put up on the screen, but I will invite people to unmute to be able to participate responsibly. Yitkadal v'yikadash shmei Rabbah. Alma divrach yirtei v'amlich malchutei b'chayechon v'mechon v'chayed chol Beit Yisrael v'hagala b'zman kariv v'meru. Amen. Shmei Rabbah Artron minasei vitadar v'toiv t'lal shmei the kudusha brichu elam mikol berchata v'shata tushchata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'meru. Amen. V'tzoroton dechol Beit Yisrael kadam lohon devishmaya v'meru. Amen. Shalom rab min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'koisha v'meru. Amen. Oseh shalom imromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshrei tevel v'meru. Amen. Anyone who is standing may be seated, at least for a moment, and I will put us all back onto mute, except for Barry Pastor, if you want to unmute yourself one more time, and you can lead us in the beginning of the Torah service, please.
Ein kamocha be'elim Adonai v'ein kemasecha malchusecha malchus kol olamim umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai oz li'amo yitain Adonai yivorech esamo v'shalom of harachamim eitiv avertzon ko'es Zion tivnei chomos Yerushalayim Ki v'chol levad b'tochnu melech el ram v'nisa Adon olamim. Vayehi ben so Aharon vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha ki mitzion tetzei sora ki mitzion tetzei sora Udevar Adonai Mirushalayim Baruch Shenasan Torah Torah Baruch Shenasan Torah Torah Li'amo Yisrael B'kedusha so.
Thank you so much, Barry. Anyone who is standing may be seated. Yasher Koach. And yeah, it's last week I met Leo and Danielle here to do a little prep on Friday before the bar mitzvah last Shabbos, and we got upstairs and we were doing a run through, and I opened the ark upstairs and I realized the Torah was still down here. And so this morning I brought it back down, but it's nice to, it's nice to actually bring the Torah into our services. I know that's something we're really missing. And yeah, thank you, Barry, for leading us into this part of our tefillah this morning. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Really nice to see you all. This morning, we're going to be reading from Parshat Mi-ketz. And before I go into what we're actually going to be reading about, I just want to highlight how kind of oddly the second cycle of the triennial reading works out. For those of you who have been paying attention for the last couple of weeks, which I know is most of you, this tends to be a crowd that pays pretty good attention. this morning, we're going to start with Egypt going into their 7 years of famine. Last week, what we read about in our triennial cycle was the kind of tense and strange family and sexual relationship of Judah and Tamar. And the week before that, what we read in the triennial cycle was the rape of Dinah. And so given kind of how narrative based the book of Genesis is, it feels very strange to be jumping around in this way. And I'm not saying this as a disparagement of the triennial cycle. I think it's great for our congregation, and it's certainly great for me. You know, especially at a time when we do take the Torah out every week. I could not learn a full parsha's worth of Torah of Torah reading every week, but I do think it's worth noting from time to time kind of how exactly, you know, this system that we take advantage of, or that we utilize kind of pulls us back from the narrative and changes our experience of the narrative on a week-to-week basis. And like I said, as far as narrative goes, this week's is fantastic. I know we're all, you know, pretty intimately familiar with it, whether it be from the lead up to the Passover story, or reading it every year, or, you know, seeing it on Broadway or in downtown Newburyport through Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I wish I could do a little bit of a better Pharaoh as Elvis, and I would, you know, just regale you with songs, but I am not going to go that route this morning. My voice is still recovering from hitting the high notes on Ma's tour every week, every night for the last week. So I will just I'll give you the quick overview, which is we pick up this morning with Pharaoh's two dreams, his dreams of 7 beautiful fat things, followed by 7 skinny and distressed things that eat the beautiful fat things. First cows and then grain. No one can explain his dream, and so word of this Israelite slave who knows how to interpret dreams, who is in jail, comes to him through the cupbearer, who Joseph explained his dream in last week's narrative. And we, of course, get Joseph's explanation of the dream of 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, and Joseph's rise to being the second in command to Pharaoh and overseeing these 7 years of plenty and these 7 years of famine. And then, of course, in those 7 years of famine, there's probably kind of 2 different famines going on. There's a famine in Egypt, and there's also a famine in the land of Canaan, because their agricultural cycles are different enough that it would be very weird for there to be one large famine. But however it is exactly that it works out, Jacob and his sons also do not have food. And so 10 of the 11 remaining brothers descend to Egypt. They come before Joseph asking for food. Benjamin, the youngest, is of course left at home under the watchful eye of his father. Joseph recognizes them. Joseph recognizes them, they do not recognize him, and we get this back and forth of kind of him keeping himself hidden and kind of goading or manipulating the brothers into kind of revealing their own hand and their own family situation, which is something we'll talk about either from you all pausing me and asking questions, or at the end of the Torah service. And then we have the brothers going home with food, that food not lasting, and then needing to come down a second time with Benjamin. And that, of course, you know, brings up again a lot of tension with Jacob in letting go of his youngest child and the only remaining child of his from his beloved wife Rachel. Joseph then tricks the brothers and puts his special Kiddush cup into Benjamin's sack of grain, which is when that's found out, he demands that Benjamin be held back in Egypt. And we end this week on a cliffhanger. And this week, what we'll actually be reading again in this second chunk of the triennial is we're going to begin with the 7 years of famine in Egypt. And we're basically going to take it through the brothers heading back down to Egypt a second time. So that's our little snapshot. And the one thing I want to highlight before we dive in is my head this week, or certainly at least still kind of today, is very much both still engaged in Hanukkah and engaged in kind of larger trends in Jewish history, because that's what I was writing papers about this week. And I think it's really interesting to read this Parsha the day after Hanukkah ends and see some kind of trends and motifs that run throughout Jewish history. And one of the things that's particularly, so Sharon asked, Kiddush cup or divining cup? It seems like it was probably both. He says his divination cup, it was his special cup. I said Kiddush cup because I thought it was, I was being clever. Yeah, so one of the things that's really jumping out to me in reading the Joseph story immediately after Hanukkah, and this is something I've been discussing with some of you, either one-on-one or in adult ed for the last couple of weeks, is just kind of how much broader the story of Hanukkah is than we sometimes give it credit for, especially when we kind of simplify it down to the kid-friendly version of, the Maccabees pushed back the Greeks and there was a miracle of 8 nights of oil. Giving that kind of 2-sentence summary doesn't exactly give the holiday or the historical narrative of the holiday its full due. And one of the bigger tensions that we don't often talk about when discussing Hanukkah is not just the military tension between the Jews at the time and the Greeks, but actually the tension within the Jewish people in dealing with Greek influence and just Hellenizing and Hellenization and assimilation and how, kind of Jewish authorities at the time deal with that and face that head on. And I think if you look at the Joseph story, you actually see some of those same tensions playing out, long before we get to the time of the temple and the time of Hanukkah. There are two especially kind of striking manifestations of this. The first is, of course, that Joseph's brothers don't recognize him. And presumably, time has passed, it's 20 years later. It's understandable why they would not recognize him at the surface, but presumably a big part of this lack of recognition is the fact that he is fully assimilated into being an Egyptian authority figure. And he is dressing like an Egyptian, walking like an Egyptian, talking like an Egyptian. Thank you, Mike. Given the little walk like an Egyptian, another song I'm not going to sing right now. But that he really has, he is no longer recognizable as a son of Israel, as is Jacob's name now, but he is really kind of come into his own as an Egyptian. And the other manifestation of this we see, and we'll read this in this morning's text, is that when Joseph's brothers come to talk to him, they need an interpreter in the room. Essentially meaning, and it says that Joseph only understands them because he has an interpreter in the room. And so there's an indication there that whatever language was unique to the Israelites being kind of Jacob's tribe at that time was something that Joseph had forgotten over his 20 years in Egypt. And so I think this tension between kind of maintaining the separateness of Jewish culture, but also needing to fit in and, protecting those differences versus assimilating is something that has been around in the Jewish people and the Jewish text essentially since there was Jewish people and Jewish text. We keep seeing these are tensions we feel in every story and really in every generation of Jewish history. And I just think it's, again, especially coming off the train of thought of Hanukkah and all the different facets of it, I think it's an interesting narrative to be reading into the Joseph story as well. Yeah, Sharon, go ahead.
I'm sorry, took a minute. I was going to ask about the interpreter. I thought that was part of Joseph's game, that he was pretending not to understand. And actually, I thought there was Midrash that said that it was his son who was playing that role. Is all of that not true?
Well, true and not true, and Bruce had the same question in the chat, it looks like. True and not true is obviously a little bit kind of a fuzzy concept here. I'm not familiar with the midrash that it was his son who was the interpreter. But I would say if you, so the verse that I'm looking at for this is chapter 42, verse 23. And it comes when the brothers are kind of having an aside to themselves in front of Joseph. And the verse reads, they did not know that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between him and them. So I think you can read it either way, right? You can read it as either they thought he didn't understand because there was an interpreter in the room, in which case that's that kind of midrashic, like he's hiding himself, he's hiding himself from them. Or I think on the literal interpretation of the text, at least the way I read it, is maybe they just didn't catch on to the fact that the interpreter was listening in on them and reporting back. I think it could go a little bit either way. It is the only time where it indicates that there is an interpreter, and so certainly there is this like I think I see at least a little bit of tension. Maybe it's not there, and I think also it would make sense in terms of what the rabbinic narrative is through the ages, to have a midrash that would push back on that idea that Joseph assimilated, right? That Joseph forgot his roots, because that is often what the rabbinic agenda is when it comes to things like this. It's how could you possibly forget, that history and that language? Yeah, Gene.
Related question, with all this assimilation, how have the rabbis constructed Joseph's religious beliefs? He seems to still believe that his gifts are coming from the God of Israel, but yet he's assimilated to this Egyptian culture. Has he adopted the Egyptian gods as well? Is he not a monotheist at this point?
The perception that I get from the text, and again, certainly the way the rabbis would interpret it, is absolutely that he is a monotheist at this point. And I think, it's interesting, and I encourage you to look carefully through the text, because there is a tension there that I don't quite know what to do with, because especially from what we see as we move more into Egyptian culture in the book of Exodus, and this emphasis on, that Pharaoh really detesting the God of Israel and really putting, Pharaoh as the ultimate God of the land of Egypt. Joseph, internally and externally does not ever stop giving all the credit for the things that happened to him and around him to the God of Israel. And so I think that faith remains very central to him. And it does strike me also as a little bit strange that this isn't weirder to people, right? That he is kind of giving all the credit to a God who they generally don't accept in the same way that he does. And it's also possible that, because he is so central to their society, because he is the one who kind of is their savior, that maybe the Egyptians just kind of write him off as a little bit of a kook, but a very useful kook. And so they let him kind of occupy this singular place of being very different, but also having enough value that you just kind of leave it alone because you don't want to look that gift horse in the mouth. That's the way I think that I read the narrative here and read Joseph's. And there is some, as Sharon said, the cup is referred to as a divination cup, which is not something that exactly goes along with monotheistic Jewish God practice. But the rabbis do kind of dance around that a little bit in saying that he kept it as a divination cup so that, it would appear as if he believed in some of the things that they believed in, and really trying to kind of skirt that line of, what does it take to fit in, and where do your beliefs actually lie, and actually having a little bit of difference between, what you're practicing internally and what you're putting out to the world externally. Thank you both. Any other comments or questions before we dive in? It is a fascinating narrative, and there's a lot to seize upon. We also do have two yortzites today that we'll be including El Male for. So I encourage. I'll build a couple pauses into the Torah reading and check in. But I also, of course, as always, encourage you, if there's something that catches your eye, to put it in the chat, and I'll do my best to address that when we do take a pause. But for now, I'd like to invite everyone or anyone who would like to unmute themselves, and we'll begin our Torah reading this morning by saying La'asok b'divrei Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. And for anyone who has an Eitz Chaim at home, we're picking up on page 257, and that's chapter 41, verse 53. I'll put it up on the screen. Amen. Vatichlena sheva shnei hasava asher haya be'eretz Mitzrayim. Vatchilena sheva shnei harav lavo kasher amar Yosef vayehi ra'av b'chol ha'aratzot u'b'chol eretz Mitzrayim haya lachem vatirav kol eretz Mitzrayim vayitzak ha'am el paro la lachem Ayomer paro lechol Mitzrayim lechu el Yosef asher yomar lachem ta'asu v'harav haya al kol pnei haaretz vayiftach Yosef et kol asher bahem vayishbor leMitzrayim vayechazak harav be'eretz Mitzrayim v'chol haaretz ba'u Mitzrayma Lishbor el Yosef ki chazak harav b'chol haaretz vayar Yaakov ki yesh shever ben Mitzrayim vayomer Yaakov levanav lama titra'u vayomer hine shamati ki yesh shever ben Mitzrayim redu shama v'shivru lanu misham V'nichyeh v'lo namut vayardu achei Yosef asara lishbor bar mimitzrayim v'et binyamin achei Yosef lo shalach Yaakov et echav ki amar penikraenu ason vayavo'u b'nei Yisrael lishbor b'toch habayim ki haya harav be'eretz Canaan V'Yosef hu hashalit al haaretz hu hamashpir lechol am haaretz vayavo'u achei Yosef yishachavu lo apayim arza vayar Yosef et echav v'yakirem vayitnaker alehem vayidaber itam kashot Vayomer alehem me'ayin batem vayomeru me'eretz Canaan lishbar ochel vayikar Yosef et echav vehem lo hikiruhu vayizkor Yosef et hachalamot asher chalam lahem vayomer alehem meraglim atem lirot et ervat haaretz batem vayomru elav lo adoni Vavadecha ba'u lishbor ochel kulanu bnei ish echad nachnu kenim anachnu lo hayu avadecha meraglim vayomer alehem lo kirvat haaretz batem lirot vayomru shneim asar avadecha achim anachnu bnei ish echad be'eretz Canaan V'hinei hakaton et avinu hayom v'ha'echad enenu vayomer alehem Yosef hu asher dibarti alechem lemor meraglim atem bezot tibachenu chei faro im tetzu mize ki im bevo achichem hakaton hena shilchu mikem echad vayikach et achichem vatem heasru vayibachanu divrechem haemet itchem V'im lo chei faro ki meraglim atem vayesof otam el mishmar shloshet yamim vayomer alehem Yosef bayom hashlishi zot asu v'chyu et Elohim ani arei. And we'll pause there for a minute. In just a second, Joel, we'll turn to you, and the El Male will be including for your mother this week. A couple things I just want to kind of throw out there to think about. The first thing I forgot to say at the beginning, which is as we read through the text, one thing I'd like to kind of call special attention to that we will be talking about a little bit more later is just how the named characters act and how we see kind of character development or character regression, specifically amongst Jacob and Joseph and Ruben and Judah, all kind of really central characters in this story. The other thing I just want to point out is how the way the society is dealing with scarcity, right? There appears to be a very widespread famine, and Egypt appears to have prepared for it very well, in large part thanks to Joseph and his dreams and Pharaoh's dreams and his leadership. And they're not. It doesn't seem like they're closing their doors. They are kind of letting people in and letting people ask for food and letting foreigners come in for food and supplying that. And I'm not enough of a Egyptologist or a history buff or anything to know exactly what the power dynamics or the politics that this led into or played into. But I do think it's striking. It's not, they had enough, no one else had enough, and they closed their borders and that was it. Everyone was kept out. It does seem like there is kind of an openness and a sharing that happens and some sort of cooperation, which I think is a really, just kind of a striking model for how their society was dealing with an extreme famine. And I think it's worth noting. So we're going to pause here, and we're going to include an El Male for Joel's mother, and then I'll give him an opportunity to share a little bit. El Male Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'malot Kedoshim Uterim Kezor HaKiyam Asirin Et Nishmat Elka Bat Yitzchak V'Delia Shel Chal Olama Ba'avur Shenachnu Mipalim Bad Haskarat Nishmata Began Eden Temenuchata Lachin Bal Rachamim Yastria V'Seter Knafav Le'olamim V'Yitzror V'Yitzrochim Et Nishmata Adonai Hu Nachota V'Tanuach B'Shlom Al Mishkava V'Nomar Amen.
So my mom was very sweet, on the quiet side, modest woman. That came out particularly in the story that when she was in high school, she performed at the Hartford Athenaeum in a showcase of high school musicians, but she always belittled that. She said, oh, it wasn't anything, I wasn't that good. But when I was maybe 4 or 5, she would play the piano, particularly this one song that I particularly love, Rites of Spring. And I would dance around the room. And dance has been a big thing in my life throughout my life. Studied various forms. So it goes back to her playing. And on the Jewish side, she grew up with agnostic parents, getting away from Latvia and Ukraine and wanting to be modern. And so she didn't know a whole lot, but one memory is Purim festival when I was 9 or 10. I was going as the king, and she made a mantle. Is that what you call it? The kind of fur around the collar, and used India ink on cotton to design it. And I went with a woman, a young girl, actually, as a quote date, and the India ink came off on her costume, her dress. So going to the end of her life, what I take away from her model was friendliness. She would talk, sure, about her life with waitresses and clerks and ask them theirs. Generosity, she always looking to give, and good spirit. She, as I said, she wasn't a particularly religious woman, but at the end of life, she started talking about God, thanking God for lots. First time I was hearing her refer to God. So I aspire to that model for the end of life.
Joel, thank you for sharing and for bringing in your memories of your mom. I almost wish that you would have bring in some pictures of you either dancing around the room as a little guy or the costume she made you for that Purim. But yeah, thank you for bringing in, you know, the early memories and the later memories and painting a little bit of that picture for us. We will continue back in the Chumash. We are again in the Eitz Chaim. We're on page 260, chapter 42, verse 19, and I will put it up on the screen. Amen. Im kenim atem achichem echad yeyaser beveit mishmarchem. Ve'atem lechu haviu shever ra'avon batechem. Ve'et achichem hakaton taviu elai. Vayamnu divrechem velo tamutu. Vayasru chen vayomru ish el achiv aval. Ashemim anachnu alachinu asher ra'inu. Tzarat nafsho behitchanano elenu velo shamanu. Al kain ba'a elenu hatzara hazot vayan Ruben otam lemor halo. Amarti alechem lemor al techetu vayeled velo shmatem. Vegam damo hineni drash. Vehem lo yada'u ki shomea Yosef ki hamelitz benotam. Vayisov malehem vayifk. Vayashav alehem vayidaber alehem vayikach meitam et Shimon vayasar oto leinehem. Vayitzav Yosef vayimalu et kleihem bar ulashiv kaspehem ish El Sako, Vilatet Lahem, Seidala Derech, Vayaslam Kain, Vayisu et Shivram, Al Chamorehem, Vayelchu Misham, Vayiftach Echad et Sako, Latet Mispo, Lachamoro Bam Alon, Vayar et Kaspo, Vinehu Befi, Im Tachto, Vayomer Elechav, Hushav Kaspi, Vegam hine ve'am tachti, vayetze libam leyecherdu, ish el achiv lemor mazot, asa Elohim lanu, vayavo el Yaakov avihem artza Canaan, vayagidu lo et kol korot otam lemor, Diber Haish Adonai Haaretz Itanu Kashot Vayitain Otanu Kimraglim Et Haaretz Vanomer Elav Kinim Anachnu Lo Hayinu Meraglim Shnei Masar Anachnu Achim B'nei Avinu Hechad Einenu V'Hakaton Hayom Et Avinu Be'eretz Canaan Vayomer Eleinu Haish Adonai Haaretz Bezot Eidach Yichenim Atem Achichem Hachad Hanichu Iti Vetravon Batechem Kechu Valechu Vehavihu Et Achichem Hakaton Elai Vaeda Ki Lo Meraglim Atem Kichenim Atem Et achichem eten lachem vet haaretz tischaru vayehi hem merikim sakehem v'nei ishtor kaspo besako vayiru etzrorot kaspehem hema vavihem vayirau vayomer alehem Yaakov vavihem Oti shikaltem Yosef enenu v'Shimon enenu vet Binyamin tikachu alai hayu chulana vayomer Ruben el aviv lemor el shnei vanai tamit im lo avienu elecha tena oti al yadi vani ashivenu elecha vayomer lo yered beni imachem ki achiv meit vehu Levado nishar ukrahu ason bederech asher telchu ba v'horadetem et sevati biagon she'ola. And let's pause there for a moment. I see a hand from my mom and a couple comments in the chat. So first of all, Bruce comes back to this. Did he really need an interpreter, or did he pretend to need an interpreter? I don't remember the story very well. Bruce, I know you sent that to me privately. I hope you don't mind me reading it verbatim. Sorry. And yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what the most classic interpretation, no pun intended, is that he did not need an interpreter, but that the interpreter was kind of to allow him to hide his identity from his brothers. I also imagine that it was kind of standard practice. You know, if we do think about all these different people who might have been coming in to ask for food and to solicit food from the Egyptians, that there was just always an interpreter in the room. I assume it was kind of, you know, like almost like the United Nations, where they have, you know, they had a guy lined up with every language that would be coming in. And it was just kind of standard practice to have an interpreter in the room. And it does seem like no one besides Joseph knew that Joseph understood. And then Joel, let me just look at the verse you're talking about. Mike, which happened many times in your business experience?
Still won't unmute. Okay. That I'd be negotiating with a team against, not against, but with Japanese and other foreigners, but particularly Japanese. And they always had an interpreter, even though most of them understood English very well. And some people were fooled into making comments they thought the other people didn't understand. So yeah, I think it's common, or has been common in the past.
Yeah,
in my personal experience.
I will also add from my own personal experience, you know, having spent as much time as I did in South America and getting to know Spanish, as lucky as I was able to get to know Spanish, it can actually be really enlightening and sometimes fun, depending on the situation, to play that role of, like, you know, just standing in the corner and playing a little bit dumb and assuming that assuming everyone else assumes you don't understand a word, and then being able to, like, respond to them in their language, and, you know, actually reveal that you knew exactly what was going on. And it is a way, you know, if you do want to, if Joseph was trying to catch what was really going, what his brothers were really thinking or saying, and this idea of have they evolved, have they developed, have they changed, or are they still the same guys? Probably the most effective way for him to do it was to kind of play that, you know, have an interpreter in front of him so that they assume, you know, they assume that whatever they're speaking to themselves doesn't get understood by him. It still doesn't exactly match up though in my mind, because if the interpreter's in the room and the interpreter can presumably hear what they're saying and Joseph can presumably hear what they're saying, like there never would have been a secret. So there's some little gap here that I don't quite understand how it all plays out with everyone in the same room. But yeah, I think that, you know, there is definitely that sense of hiding his true identity from his brothers.
May I just tell a short story that's sort of relevant? I'll keep it short, very short. But we had an Israeli exchange student in our house when Amy was in high school. And they became very good friends, and we became good friends with her. And about a year later, Amy traveled to Israel to stay with her and do stuff in Israel. And they went on a bus between two towns in Israel, and they were chatting away in English. And there were some young men behind them that assumed they didn't understand Hebrew. And they started talking about the two girls. And that was, Amy relayed this story to me. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, speaking a different language is a powerful and tricky to, you know, there's a lot of power dynamics at play when you're in a foreign land and you speak more than one language. Joel, do you want to explain your comment and question a little bit more, and then Mom will turn to you?
Well, this is Kaplan's version, 42:18. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "If you do as I say, you will live. I fear the God." What does "I fear the God" have to do with "do as I tell you"?
I think it's basically Joseph acknowledging that he is in a position of power over them in terms of he has them locked up, and if he wanted to, he could kind of kill them or enslave them or put them in jail. And he's basically acknowledging that he's not going to do that because he has this God who is a higher power that Joseph respects in common with them. And so he's kind of both, as we talked about earlier, like bringing his own God-fearing ways into the conversation, and also at the same time kind of flaunting his own power over them in the moment. He's playing it a little bit both ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As much as anything?
Right.
Yeah, Mom.
Yeah, so today I noticed something that I've never noticed before, and that is when originally one of the representatives when the brothers say we are 12 brothers from one father, and the youngest is no, actually there is in both renditions, the first rendition to Joseph, and where they say one child is with our father and one is not, is Einenu, Ve'achad Einenu, which is Joseph. One is not, I don't know how to translate Einenu, but then in the story that they relate to Jacob when they come back, they also say it in a little bit different, a different way, but they do say that one is not there at all, meaning, you know, the Joseph piece.
Yeah, and that word that you picked up on there, so there is, as we continue reading, I think Jacob will say explicitly, or he just said it explicitly once, that his son Joseph is dead. but much more common than that. Yeah, he says in the last verse we read, my son must not go down with you, talking about Benjamin, for his brother is dead. And that's the only time that they actually treat Joseph as if he's dead. Pretty much all the other times they're talking about him, they use this term of enenu, like he is not here. Acknowledging certainly from the brothers aspect that, you know that they sold him off, but they don't know exactly what to. And even from a bunch of the ways when Jacob refers to him, it does seem much more common that it is like a lost brother or a lost son than a dead son. And following those kind of currents through the text is really interesting, especially as we see, the brothers kind of continuously grappling with what they did to Joseph and how much guilt they bear or don't bear. And some of there are some famous midrashim about this Parshat talking about how when the brothers go down to Egypt, they actually enter through 12 different gates, or 11 different gates, 10 different gates, because 10 of them go down, because they are, they realize, oh, we're going to Egypt. We sold Joseph to slave traders who are on their way to Egypt. So let's split up. Maybe we can find him. So a lot of this story on the textual level, but certainly in the rabbinic imagination, has to do with, reconciliation, righting old wrongs, dealing with guilt. There's a lot of that, both in the text and in the rabbinic interpretation as well. We are going to pause one more time and include one more El Male. This is, many of you, I think at this point know Angie Gill, who is a close friend of my mom's and a close friend of mine, the mother of one of my best friends, has been joining us pretty regularly, and she is observing Yortzeit for her father this week. So I am going to include an El Male for Angie's dad. El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nachona Al Kanfei Hashlina B'malot Kedoshim Uteorim Kezor Hakia Masirim Et Nishmat Shlomo ben David V'Sara Shalach Lo Lamo Ba'avur Shenach Mitpalim Bad Haskarat Nishmato Began Eden Tei Menuchato Bachim Barachamim Yasher B'Seter Knafav Lolamim Vitzor B'Trachim Nishmato Adonai Nachlato Yanuach B'Shlomo Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. Angie, you want to share anything about your dad?
Sure. My father was a man of who spoke many languages, and he was really a survivor. He was born in 1915. At that time, Romania was Austria-Hungarian. So he, like Joel's mother, he loved music, loved opera, and he was a great dancer. He went through terrible times, from inducted in the forced labor to Auschwitz. He survived. And he had this fantastic attitude of seeing the cup half full, always. And he really strongly believed in a person's integrity. He always believed that the Nazis came, the communists came. The only thing they can take away from you is your integrity, your honesty, and who you are. So my brother and I believe strongly in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie, and thanks for sharing, and thanks for letting us get to know you and your family a little bit better. And of course, on a week where there is like massive amounts of snow up and down the East Coast, personal memories here, the blizzard of '96 back in New York when I was more or less a little boy. My mom and I trudged through whatever 18 plus inches of snow there was on the ground over to Angie's house so that we could all have hot cocoa and play in the snow together. So it's nice to have you joining us on a week that probably has about as much snow since then. And if Danny weren't on the West Coast, I would definitely lean on him a little bit more to come join us one morning too, but maybe sometime. All right, so going back to the Torah reading, we have a couple verses left. We're at the beginning of chapter 43, and once again in the Eitz Chaim, it's page 263, and I'm going to go from here to the end of the Torah reading. Amen. V'harav kaved ba'aretz vayihi kasher kilu lechol et hashever asher heviu mitzrayim vayomer aleihem avihem shuvu shivru lanu me'at ochel vayomer elav Yehuda le'mor ha'ed he'id Banu ha'ish le'mor lo tiru fanai bilti achichem itchem im yeshcha meshalechet achinu itanu nerda v'nishbera lecha ochel v'imencha meshaleach lo nered ki ha'ish amar eleinu lo tiru fanai bilti achichem itchem vayomer Yisrael lama hareotem Li lehagid laish haod lachem ach vayomru Shaol ha'ish lanu ulmoladetenu lemor haod avichem chai hayesh lachem ach v'naged lo Al pi advarim ha'ele hayado ameda ki yomar horidu et achichem vayomer Yehuda el Yisrael aviv shilcha hanar iti v'nakuma v'nelecha v'nichye v'lo namut gam anachnu gam ata gam tapenu anochi e'ervenu miadi tevakshenu Im lo haviotiv elecha v'hitzagtiv lefanecha v'chatati lecha kol hayamim ki lulei hit mahanu ki ata shavnu zef hamayim vayomer aleihem Yisrael avihem im ken efo zot asu kechu mizmerat haaretz Bichlechem v'horidu laish mincha me'at tzari u'me'at devash nechot v'valot batnim u'shkedim v'chesef mishne kechu v'yedchem v'et ha'kesef hamushav b'fi amtchotechem tashivu v'yedchem ulai mishkehu Bet achichem kachu v'kumu shuvu al ha'ish ve'el Shaddai yiten lachem rachamim lifnei ha'ish v'shilach lachem et achichem acher vet Benyamin v'ani kasher shachalti v'yikhu hanashim et hamincha hazot u'mishne kesef v'achu bi'adam ve'et Binyamin Vayakumu vayerdu mitzrayim vayamdu lifnei Yosef. I see one more question on the morning starting before we move on. Question on 4221 from Sharon and Jean.
My question, Alex, it says, because, okay, we're being punished because we looked on it as anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. And my memory is there's no mention in the story when they throw him in the pit of Joseph pleading or any dialogue at that point.
No, there's no mention of it explicitly in the text, but like I said, they're obviously dealing with the guilt and the repercussions of that Joseph incident, of their earlier treatment of Joseph as we come into this week's Parsha. And I think, you know, for all the things that are absent in the text that we can imagine are probably there, you know, after someone gets thrown into a pit, I think it's a pretty reasonable jump to assume that he was crying out to them from that pit, right? That he was asking for rescue, and that it was a lot more kind of tense and heart-wrenching than what we actually get in the text, you know, back in last week's portion, which is essentially just they threw him in the pit and were trying to figure out what to do and waited until some Ishmaelites came along. So, you know, I think in fact, this is kind of probably them revealing a little bit more of what actually happened than what the text chooses to recount, or what the text chooses to tell in the story. Yeah, Sharon.
So this is a whole other thing, unless you want to say more about that before I ask this.
No, I think unless Jean wants to say something else about it, but.
Okay, so what I was going to say is that I had always heard and thought that the contrast with Ruben and Yehuda was that Ruben did this impulsive, not terribly convincing thing, and Judah was much more really on track and convincing and, you know, mature about the way he was offering what he was offering. But looking at it now, I'm also wondering if in fact part of the difference, or maybe the relevant difference, is more the way Jacob reacts to his two sons, that he just doesn't put much stock in Ruvain. And I don't know if it goes back to him sleeping with Bilhah or anything else, whereas he listens to Judah, maybe because that's his bias, that he trusts Judah in a way that he doesn't trust Reuben. And I don't know, I just thought of it that way from his perspective.
I'm going to more or less table that, because I do want to talk about this a little bit more explicitly in a couple of minutes. But I do think that what you're pointing out, and what will kind of probably the biggest resonance of this throughout the rest of the Torah is this is kind of the explicit beginning of the subversion of Reuben's birthright, right? Like Reuben is the oldest child of Jacob. But we are not known, you know, it doesn't come to be called, it becomes Judea, right? Judah becomes kind of the dominant tribe, the dominant personality. And this is really when that begins to happen. And so, you know, there's various kind of reasons that get tied to that. Some, like you said, going back to Reuben sleeping with Bilhah and kind of trying to subvert his father's own power. And I do think there's a lot to be read into what are their reactions, both in the initial Joseph story last week about him getting thrown in the pit and getting sold off, because they are the two primary actors in that, and this week as well in how they try to reassure their father. But we'll talk about it more in a couple minutes. And just last thing before we move on to the healing service, Joel had a question on the translation that I think he's looking at, that he's looking at from Kaplan in chapter 42, verse 34. In Hebrew, it's Ki cheinim atem et achichem eten lachem ve'et haaretz tischaru. I will then restore your brother to you, and you shall be free to move about in the land, not do business in the land. I'm not sure exactly what the Hebrew tischaru is. I'd have to look it up and get back to you as to like what that word is and what it comes from, unless someone else knows or wants to look it up in the meantime. But for now, I will turn it back to Sharon as we change gears a little bit and head into the healing service at a time where the healing service really is a little bit heavy and also a really important part of our prayers together, as the, you know, both around the world, but especially around the country. You know, there is a tremendous amount of hope being kind of opened up with the vaccine. And I don't know how many of you saw Josh Tarkin on the front page of this week's Daily News getting vaccinated. But there is still just a tremendous amount of sickness and death that is pervasive in our country from this pandemic. And so, you know, really uniting our prayers however we can to bring that in, I think is really important. So Sharon, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And let's, am I unmuted? Yes. Let's begin with the song that we use for opening our healing service. Sing with me, please, if you wish to. Mi sheberach Avotenu, Mekor habracha, Limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu, Mekor habracha, la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Misha berach avotenu v'imotenu Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Moshe v'Aharon, David u'Shlomo, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, Bilha v'Zilpa, v'Yivarech v'Yirafeh et hacholim, b'nei Abraham v'Sarah, b'nei Adam v'Chava. May God, who blessed our ancestors, bless and heal all those in need of it now. And I just wanted to add that Alex was talking about the virus and all the healing we need from that. Let's also remember to ask for healing for the fear that generates in all of us, and all the stress and anxiety that so many of us are under right now, and what that does to our spirit, and ask for healing on that level as well. The specific names I have are Louisa McCleary, Shoshana Bat Pinchas V'Chana, Meir Ben Fega V'Aaron Yitzchak, Dennis McNeely, Jess Kramer, Alexis Watson, Joel Gordon, May Daub, Bob Jelly, Bruce Mallory, Alan Mann, Barbara Dowd, John O'Brien, Jacques Mansey, Carol Barker, Catherine Doloff, Ken Bosey, Chana Bat Rivka, Lorraine Daniluk, Denise Stelmack, Yitzchak Ben Yisrael, Madeline Blake, Rachel Barcelona, Corey Brown, Kara Smoley, Adam Stander, Fotios Rallis, Chana Esther Bat Ayala Hadar. And this is the time, if you have a name you'd like to add, if you would let us know that, we'll add them as well.
Sorry, Joan?
Jessica Perkins and Lynn Pete Meltzer.
Mike?
Bart Gerald and Dina Bracha Bat Miriam.
Bob Mandel?
Selena Joan Staley, Kurt Curtis, Daniel Salinas, Carol Freeband, Ruth Hirsch.
Anyone else whose hands I didn't see? And let's just take another couple seconds to include all the people whose names we listed, and also expand our thoughts a little bit to all the names we're not remembering, or the names we're not mentioning, and everyone else who needs healing. And as Sharon said, including ourselves and our friends and our family who are, we're all under a certain amount of stress and anxiety and everything else. So really, I don't think there's anyone amongst us who doesn't need a little bit of healing. Sharon, whenever you're ready.
בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעבורם, בשחר זה הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, להחלימם ולרפאותם, ולהחזיקם ולהחיותם. וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף. שבת היא מלזעוק רפואה קרובה לבוא, השתה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ונאמר Amen.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm now going to turn it over to my mom. We are running a couple minutes long, for which I apologize, but this is also not a week to skip the Haftorah. As you'll see, this is a very famous story that has, entered the popular culture. Of course, this is King Solomon and the two women and the baby, and him. This is kind of where he establishes his reputation as a very wise man. And the Haftarah picks up with him waking up from a dream, which is kind of where the obvious connection to our Parsha comes in. What we don't start with, interestingly enough, is basically in that dream he is visited by God, and God kind of tells him he can have whatever he wants, and he asks for wisdom. And so the next thing we get is this story. And yeah, again, coming off the week of Hanukkah, where we have a really famous story, but we don't necessarily look all that closely at like the textual basis of it. I think that's true with this story too. This story is really pervasive in our culture, but I don't know when else besides right now, we take the time to actually sit down and read it and see what's in the text. So my mom will lead us in it, and I'll put it up on the screen, and we can give it that little bit of a close reading, since we have the opportunity to do that this morning. And we're on page 271, if anyone has an Eitz Chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratzav v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'torah Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet b'tzedek. Vayikatz Shlomo v'hinei chalom vayavo Yerushalayim vayamod lifnei Aaron Brit Adonai vayal olot vayas shlamim vayas mishter l'chol avodah az tavona Shetayim nashim zonot el hamelech vata'amotna lifanav vataomer haisha achat bi adoni ani v'aisha hazo yoshvot bevayit echad va'eled ima babayit vayehi Vayom hashlishi lalidti vatelet gam haisha hazot va'anachnu yachdav ein zaritanu babayit zulati shtayim anachnu babayit vayamar ben haisha hazot laila asher shachva alav Vatakam b'toch halayla vatikach et b'ni me'etzli va'amatcha yeshena vatashkivehu b'cheka v'b'na hamet yishkiva b'cheki va'akum b'boker lahinik et b'ni v'hinei me'et Betbonen elav baboker v'hinei lo haya v'ni asher yaladiti v'atomer haisha acheret lochi v'ni hachai v'nech hamet v'zot omeret lochi v'nech hamet v'ni hachai Vatidabrena lifnei hamelech, vayomer hamelech, zot omeret, zebni hachai uvenech hamet, zot omeret lochi, b'nei hamet uv'nei hachai. Vayomer hamelech kechuli charev, vayaviu hacharev lifnei hamelech. Vayomer hamelech gizru et hayelet hachai lishnayim, utenu et hachatzi lechad, ואת החצי לאחד, ותאמר האישה אשר בנה החי אל המלך, כי נחמרו רחמיה על בנה, ותאמר בידוני תנו לה את הילוד החי והמת אל תמיתו, וזאת אומרת גם לי גם לך לא יהיה גזרו. ויען המלך ויאמר תנו לה את הילוד החי והמת לא תמיתו, היא אמו. וישמעו כל ישראל את המשפט אשר שפט המלך, ויראו מפני המלך, כי ראו כי חוכמת אלוהים בקרבו לעשות משפט. ויהי המלך שלמה מלך על כל ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות. האל הנאמן האומר ועושה, המדבר מקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך. ודבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון כי בית חיינו, ולעלובת נפש תושיב מהרה בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני, משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך, ובמלכות בית דוד ימשיכך. במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסא לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו. כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד. על התורה, על עבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת.
Amen. Yasher koach, Mom. Thank you. And in response to Joel's question, it is not, to my knowledge, the shortest haftarah in the cycle, but it is definitely close. And it's always, it's great to have a haftarah that is both short and a good story, and has a good clear-cut moral and lesson in there. So thank you, Mom, for bringing that to us this morning. It's also, it's a good reminder. I often kind of, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I often kind of push the haftarah out of my mind a little bit. It's not uncommon for me to be giving it a quick scan, while something else is going on the morning of services. But whenever you volunteer to do it, you ask me what the verses are and to double check it. And so it gives me a good reminder to actually look at it before the morning of. So thank you for bringing that in this morning. I want to, Jean, unmute yourself. And then
I know we're running late, but it seems like in reading this over now, you don't know at the end which woman it was, right?
What do you mean?
Well, you have two women who are claiming this is my baby, but at the end when he resolves it, it says, well, it's this one who is the real mother, but we don't know which of those two it is.
It's the one who objects to it being cut in half.
Right, but but which one is that? We
Well,
don't
I
know.
think the way that Solomon's logic works is it has to be the real mother, because only the woman who wasn't the real mother would be okay with it being cut in half in front of her eyes.
Right, but we still don't know. We know that, but as the narrative starts, there's the one who tells one story, call her woman A, and the one who tells the other story, woman B, and we don't know whether it's woman A or woman B who is actually the real mother.
Which I think almost
And maybe
emphasizes, that's the way to emphasize the point, sort of, it doesn't matter which the story
Right,
is,
that's
it's the
probably
one
point, but
who then says, I just want the baby to live, don't.
Yeah, and I think I might need to, after Shabbos, like diagram it out a little bit and actually have A and B in front of me to be able to track it from start to beginning, and I'll see if I can do that more effectively.
I think you really can't, because I was trying to do that now too, and I felt like this is the first time I got that might be part of the point here is.
But please do, and Judy too, or anyone else, if you have another way to infer that.
Well, we have a homework assignment for this week, so maybe at the beginning of Adult Ed on Tuesday we can revisit this, or next Shabbos. So we're gonna turn back to Mi-ketz just for a couple minutes, because I do think it is really worthwhile to talk about these characters and to look at these characters. Mi-ketz gives us a window into the lives of these central characters, mostly after 20 years has passed, if you do the math out, because Joseph goes down to Egypt. Joseph goes down to Egypt when he is 17, and he rises up in Pharaoh's court when he is 30. And that is, of course, at the beginning of the 7 years of plenty. And he runs back into his brothers during the 7 years of famine. So presumably at this point, he is at least 37. 20 years had passed since he disappeared from his father's household. And we get a great window into seeing the effects that disappearance has had on some of the central characters of Jacob's story and Joseph's story. And first, of course, we have Jacob himself, who appears to have allowed the loss of his favorite son and his favorite wife to twist him into kind of what appears to be an irritable and paranoid old man. At the beginning of this morning's Torah reading, he snaps at his sons, saying, "Why do you keep looking at one another?" When the famine sets in, as if there's something that they should be doing or could be doing to protect the family, as if they are still continuously letting him down. After they go down to Egypt and return to Egypt, upon their return and hearing their story, he responds, "It is always me that you bereave. These things always happen to me." And finally, when it's time for them to go back to Egypt, and Judah lets him know that they must bring Benjamin with them if they are to return and hope to get more food and to free their imprisoned brother, Jacob admonishes them, saying, "Why did you serve me so ill as to tell the man you had another brother?" Were it not for kind of the sadness that is pervasive through his loss of Joseph and the urgency of the situation in the famine in their land, Jacob's progression as a character would almost be kind of sitcom-esque, right? A father who is frustrated by his 10 doltish sons at every turn, and he really also doubles down on coddling his new favorite. On protecting Benjamin, on keeping Benjamin close, and really going through that same pattern of mistakes and favoritism and that same behavior that tore his family apart decades earlier. And if Jacob is kind of backsliding as a character, we see Ruben, Jacob's oldest son, more or less maintaining his status quo. As the oldest son, he should be in the role of leadership, but he is a man who tends to talk big, but really without being able to provide results or much rationale behind his actions. Remember, of course, that it is Ruben who suggests throwing Joseph into the pit. And we know both more or less from the text and also from rabbinic interpretations, he doesn't actually have an end game in doing that. He's just trying to buy himself some time. And in this morning's reading, when trying to convince Jacob to let Benjamin accompany them on their own return to Egypt, Reuben tells his father, "You may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I will return him to you." And of course, our reaction should be just a very surprised, what? Like, what is he suggesting that Jacob would have an interest in putting his own 2 grandchildren's lives on the line in taking Reuben's word? It seems pretty clear that Reuben is a man throughout this narrative who kind of says the first thing that comes into his mind, but without really thinking through the way it'll play out. And without having clear plans as to turn those brash ideas into constructive action. Judah, on the other hand, is a character who actually shows some growth. Judah is the son who is directly responsible for much of the family's anguish over Joseph. His idea to sell Joseph as a slave to Egypt leaves the family not knowing what became of their little brother. And as we mentioned earlier, the word used throughout the narrative is einenu. He is no more. The family does not know what happened to Joseph. Yet when faced with protecting Benjamin, Judah steps up in a big way. He tells Jacob, "I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I shall stand guilty before you forever." In contrast to Reuben, who tries to take responsibility, but does so in a way that makes no sense, Judah has learned what it means to be accountable. He's grown out of his interactions with Tamar that we read about last week. After impregnating her when she was posing as a harlot and having her hold him accountable with his own staff and seal, he now knows something of personal responsibility and really directly of being held accountable for his actions. He is able to use that personal growth to step into a leadership role within his family, and both as a brother and eventually as a tribe, will supplant his oldest brother, Ruben. Which leaves us last, but certainly not least, with Joseph. What are we to make of this man who rose from the depths of Egyptian prison to the right-hand man of Pharaoh? What do we see in his actions as he recognizes his brothers, yet they do not know him? There are plenty of different ways we could interpret his actions. Vindictive, petty, manipulative, possibly divinely inspired, trying to make his dreams that were sent from God come true. We could see him as drunk on his own power. Most of the ways we could possibly perceive Joseph are admittedly not great. Most easily accessible on the level of a reading of the text is that he is manipulating his brothers and purposely leaving them in the dark. It certainly could be construed as cruel, and at the very least, it's something where we're left to ask, why is he doing this? Why is he pushing off that reconciliation when he has the chance to approach it head on? And to answer that question, I want to raise up one explanation brought forth by Nechama Leibowitz, the great 20th century Torah scholar, mostly living in Israel. She proposes that Joseph is pushing his brothers in this narrative towards tshuva, towards repentance, and ultimately towards a place of forgiveness. She quotes Rambam, the Maimonides, from a source that some of you might recognize from our adult ed sessions when we spoke about tshuva and repentance. And Maimonides says that true repentance can only be achieved when someone faces the exact same scenario in which they have previously sinned, and in the second opportunity does the right thing or does not sin. Joseph, yes, is being manipulative, but in some ways, he has no choice. Given his position of power, of course his brothers would be repentant if he were to reveal himself. It's only after putting his younger brother Benjamin in the same position he was in, and seeing the growth of his brothers, seeing their maturity and accountability and repentance, that he can truly forgive them and allow that honest reconciliation to take place. And I think that says a lot about what it means to actually forgive someone. Sure, at the first moment, Joseph could have just said, "Oh, my brothers, you're back. I recognize you. I forgive you. All is forgotten. I love you." I don't think that truly, without really doing that work of tshuva, without seeing that things are actually different or actually changed in any way, I think that can wind up kind of forcing someone to swallow or to put aside what can turn into pretty lingering resentment, and what can turn into lasting tension and possibly, going backwards in the steps of forgiveness and not forwards. And so, yes, Joseph delays the process. And yes, it's a little bit questionable and certainly seems manipulative on the surface. But I think there is a tremendous amount of value into working towards what is a more full forgiveness and to getting the proof that he needs from them that they have moved on, that they're not going to do to Benjamin what they did to him, in order to really fully repair that relationship and come back together as a family and as a set of 12 brothers. So yeah, a lot of different lessons we can learn from a lot of different characters in this morning's Parsha. Yeah, Sharon, please.
Sorry, yeah. I just wanted to say that I feel like all of that is true, that Joseph also needed to go through his process of being a little bit bitter and manipulative and whatever were the other things you said about him as part of his process to get himself to the place where he could forgive and reconcile. I think that's true as well as all the other things you were saying about testing his brothers and getting them to a place where he knew for sure that they were really repentant and whatever.
Yeah, and I think, can be not necessarily like the best process of kind of forgiveness and redemption, but I think there is something to be said of like, he had resentment he needed to work out. And so the way he did that was by tricking them, by manipulating them, whatever it is. But, that way, when they do all come back together, not only have they kind of proven themselves, but he's also hopefully got it out of his system. And it's not, at every family Thanksgiving or whatever it is, hey, remember that time you threw me in a pit? It's like, hey, we're back together. We're in this moment. We're a family again. And that does need to be kind of a two-sided thing. So thank you for bringing that aspect into it. Any other thoughts or comments? Wonderful. Well, I'm going to close the ark and we will move towards the end of services. And certainly kind of along the lines of what I expected, so much going on in this morning's Parsha that there was definitely a lot to talk about. And I'm glad we had so much good back and forth and conversation. So thank all of you. We will continue with full Kaddish. I'm not going to put it on the screen, but I will ask people to unmute to respond to the Kaddish. Yikala v'ikala shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach yirtei v'amlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yamachon v'chay l'chol Beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kariv v'meru.
Amen.
Yehi
Shmei Rabbah Amalaya Yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'shabach v'yitbar v'shram v'naseh v'yadar v'tlei v'talal shmei d'kudesha brichu. Elam michol berchata v'shirata shulchata v'nechmata d'amiran be'alma v'meru.
Amen.
יתקבל צונדון לכל בית ישראל, קדם להון בשמיא וימרו.
Amen.
יהי שלום רב מן שמיא, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו.
Amen.
עושה שלום ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל וימרו.
Amen.
And we will go back on mute and conclude together with the Aleinu. If you would like, please rise. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, ate gedula leotzer reshit, shelo asanu keguyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, vanachnu korim, umishtachavim, umodim, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה השמיים ויוסד הארץ ומשה ויקרו בשמיים ממעל שכינתו זו בגבי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס תלתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום להשיבות אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Just a moment, we'll come unmuted for the Mourner's Kaddish. This week, Congregation Ahavas Achim marks the Yortzeitin of Eleanor Grossman and Dale Parks. May their memories be a blessing. Please join me in the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'almad yivrach yirutei ve'amlich malchutei ve'chayechon u'yomechon u'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael v'agala u'zman kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah me'aram
Barach v'ishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yishomam v'yitasei v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal Ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata v'arulan talma v'imru Amen. Yehi Shlam Rabba min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu
ve'al kol Israel v'imru
Amen.
Oseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel v'imru Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. Thank you all so much. You get the extra hardcore award for this Shabbat. I apologize that we went a little bit long, but certainly a lot of worthwhile conversation going on, and so nice to have you all joining us. The next couple weeks will be a little bit quieter, especially after Hanukkah or compared to Hanukkah, but we will still have our Tuesday night adult ed, our Thursday morning minyan, and of course, we will be here every Saturday morning, rain or shine, snow, or anything else that might come our way. The two things that I will start putting here in your worm about looking forward to January is January 10th, Sunday afternoon. Coming out of a discussion we had in Adult Ed a couple months ago about Abraham's relationship with Ishmael and how the Islamic community views this story. A teacher of mine who taught my Intro to Muslim course for Jewish clergy, his name is Imam Taimullah, who is an imam in the Boston area, will be joining us over Zoom to give his take, not his take, but both his and kind of an Islamic take on that story and on those relationships. I expect that will be a fascinating program. So that'll be in the e-blast as of tomorrow. And I would encourage you all to come and help spread the word. And then at the end of January, working with the Newburyport Jewish Cemetery Committee, we're going to be having a kind of a workshop and panel on Jewish approaches to end of life, including some information about the cemetery, including some information from Joel about his work in hospice. And I or a guest speaker, we will see how that plays out, talk a little bit about kind of also just Jewish practice and how that plays in. And of course, there'll be tons of other stuff going on. As always, please read the e-blast with a careful eye. Any other announcements or things you want anybody to know? Great. Then let us conclude our